United Nations experts have called for an immediate investigation by the United States and others into information they received suggesting that Amazon owner billionaire Jeff Bezos' phone was hacked after receiving a file sent from Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's WhatsApp account. In a statement released earlier this week, the UN Special Rapporteur said that at a time when Saudi Arabia was supposedly investigating the killing of prominent Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi government was instead, quote, clandestinely waging a massive online campaign against Mr. Bezos, targeting him principally as the owner of the Washington Post. And one of the authors of that statement is UN Special Rapporteur David Kay. He tells me that the UN is getting involved in this matter because it is concerned about wider efforts by the Saudi government to silence critics by infiltrating their communication devices, as well as manipulating social media to amplify voices praising Prince Mohammed bin Salman. David, just to be clear, you and your colleagues released a statement and not a report.
Correct.
Correct. Now, will you be releasing a report on this?
To give some background here, we received information which we described in our statement. We have raised these concerns in a formal communication to the government of Saudi Arabia, and we raised them publicly this week. Our aim is to, over the next several months, continue to investigate this issue. I mean, both, Agnes Calamard, my colleague, who is continuing to investigate the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and myself, in my work on the private surveillance industry, we're looking at both of those elements, and we plan to say more about them as we can later on in this year.
And what kind of evidence did you view?
What we reviewed was a forensic report that provided significant information about the alleged hack of a phone belonging to Jeff Bezos, through his WhatsApp account and through an account that belonged to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And the information provides details, factual information about how the two exchanged information originally, their contact numbers, and the kinds of messages that were sent from the Crown Prince, at least from his account, to Mr. Bezos.
Now, some people will ask how this issue falls within the purview of the UN. Can you explain to us how the UN is involved and why?
Yeah, so in my own mandate, my mandate, which is a mandate that was created by the United Nations Human Rights Council, the central human rights body of the UN system, I was mandated. I am formally asked to gather and consider information related to alleged violations of freedom of expression. For several years, I have been, gathering information and reporting on instances of surveillance, both mass surveillance and the kind of targeted surveillance that's at issue here, because of the way in which surveillance has the potential to interfere with the freedom of expression. Surveillance is often used as a tool to intimidate journalists or activists not to speak. It's often used as a way to blackmail people to avoid government criticism, and it has a very, very serious chilling effect on all sorts of speakers. So, this falls, directly into our mandates. It falls directly into the kind of standard operating procedure that we pursue when we are dealing with cases of human rights violations. And you can go and look at all of the different communications we've done over the years to see that this is actually quite consistent with our normal practices.
Right. And were you able to draw a connection between what happened in this case and the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, that's one of the questions that's a part of our ongoing investigation. One of the things that we see, and this is a part of the annex to our public statement yesterday, is that at the same time that we have these allegations of hacking against Mr. Bezos, we also have very strong evidence of the hacking of individual Saudi activists and journalists who were associates of Jamal Khashoggi, and the evidence of the hacking, is directly in the same time frame as the period in which there was increasing intimidation of Jamal Khashoggi and preceded the ultimate murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So, the connections between that, the fact that the pattern of the allegations is strikingly similar between the activists and the alleged hacking of Mr. Bezos is certainly enough for us to, if not draw conclusions, to draw from them very, very serious concerns that need to be addressed by the government and ideally by independent fact finders.
Now, you're calling for the U.S. government to institute an immediate investigation into this matter. What happens if the U.S. government doesn't investigate? What next? Well,
our call is for an investigation by the U.S. and other relevant actors, and I think there's multiple ways to think about this. On the one hand, there's the question of the fact that an individual, or the allegation that an individual American citizen was hacked by a foreign government. That certainly seems to be within the nature of what we expect law enforcement in the United States to investigate. Certainly, as a matter of criminal law and of federal law, it's something that I think the U.S. government should investigate. But there's also other elements here that deserve wider investigation by other actors. For example, the nature of the surveillance industry that might have provided the software, the malware, what some call spyware, that was involved here or is alleged to be involved here, needs to be investigated. But it's a global problem, so that global problem really requires a global investigation that could involve, the auspices of the UN, perhaps even Agnes and I convening that kind of investigation. But this is certainly not just a U.S. issue. I think it's a broad global concern.
Right, and there was a report that came out, I think, late last year, talking about how different governments were using some nefarious methods to spy on either opponents or dissidents using WhatsApp. Were you able to see, or have you been able to see some of these cases during your investigations of governments using such methods or using WhatsApp and other telecommunication means to spy on opposition people?
Yeah, so I actually submitted a report to the Human Rights Council last June that deals precisely with this question, and we identified a number of cases. A number of human rights organizations have identified cases that go directly to this problem. One of the things that I would emphasize is that this is not really an issue of WhatsApp in particular. It's a broader issue of basically how governments and private companies develop tools to hack into personal devices. And not just personal devices like your portable ones. It could also be your laptop, your desktop, and so forth. That's a really important point. That we're not talking about this. Shouldn't be understood as a case of say WhatsApp's vulnerability. It's a case of the use of these nefarious tools through all sorts of means, through all sorts of platforms, all sorts of tools to surveil individuals who are targeted by the state, and often those individuals are vulnerable. 99.999% of them are not of the resources of Jeff Bezos. They're activists, journalists, and others who have limited resources to protect themselves.
David Kerr, thank you very much for talking to us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.